Hey Village, if you haven't heard of or watched the Netflix series MAID, this video is for you. As a foster caregiver, I'm gonna give you guys my take on the different lessons that I learned through this series. And I'm actually about halfway through the book because the series is actually inspired by the book by Stephanie Land, which is also called MAID, Hard Work, Low Pay, and a Mother's Will to Survive. So I do have to say that there may be spoilers in this video, and also I will be talking about domestic violence, so I wanna put out that trigger warning as well. So the overview of this story when it comes to the Netflix series, the main character is called Alex. Even though the author of the book, which is a memoir, it's a true story, her name is Stephanie Land. So Alex is a young mother who is experiencing domestic violence at home and a lot of financial instability. So she's struggling with leaving the domestic violence and the domestic abuse situation, but not having the resources and support system to make it on her own with her daughter. It shows incredible determination of Alex, but also you can see through this story how many people, given the same circumstances, would not be able to achieve what she did. And in general, this series is made really, really well. So it has that shameless feel. So if you're familiar with that series, I believe it has the same directors or producers, or there's some kind of a connection, and you can tell. It definitely is a very, very heavy series. This is not something that I think John and I could have binge watched even if we had the time, because it's just so emotionally heavy watching this girl go through all of these different circumstances. And I have to call out, like, from the beginning, I think the first episode, the edits were incredible. It literally showed her, on screen how much money she had in her bank account, and every single, gallon of gas is ticking away at that when she has to buy lunch for her daughter, getting closer and closer to zero, and she has nowhere to go, and she doesn't have a job. But just the way that the edits were done to really show what this was like for her from her perspective really set it apart. And I think one of the early episodes, she was in the courtroom and they're talking about custody between her and her significant other. And again, to talk about that perspective that they show, she doesn't understand what's going on in the courtroom. So literally the show, the people are just saying legal, 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 legal. And I can totally relate to that. I've been in situations where you're attending family court and they're going on and you have no idea what they're actually talking about because it's all legal speak. And while Alex and Stephanie never had their child removed from their care and placed into foster care, that is a differentiation, there are still so many lessons to learn, because imagine being a primary parent. Your kid has been taken away. You're showing up to this, family court to hear, okay, why was the child removed? What needs to happen? What's the timeline? And you don't even know what they're talking about. That has to feel so lonely and so helpless. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from this series, if you're going to watch it, is really pay attention to the bureaucracy that is behind different government assistance programs. And again, these are similar programs that if you have kids placed with you, their parents are trying to navigate. The amount of paperwork, the amount of time wasted, going into an office and waiting in line, waiting for your turn. And all of that is taking away from the time that you have to work. So in this case, with someone who is battling and really just trying to get to the poverty line just to provide for her and her daughter, she's really struggling to be able to work enough hours while still being able to complete all the paperwork, complete all the requirements that are necessary for her. And I see this with primary parents. We've had situations where when scheduling for visitation, it interferes with the parent's work. So they're left with this impossible decision of, do I try to work this out with my employer, who may or may not understand, who may or may not concede and allow for that flexibility, or do I have to skip a visitation because there's this conflict? But if I skip the visitation, it's going to look like I don't care enough, that I'm not doing what I need to do to get my kids back. It's just these competing things that primary parents have to deal with. So I definitely have a new level of empathy when it comes to primary parents, especially with this series that talks about poverty and domestic abuse. And there are times when Alex makes choices that You as the viewer are like, no, don't do that. You're making it worse. You know, the fact that she goes back to her abuser, that's hard to watch. It's hard to watch her go back into that situation. At the same time, you can see, because the series is done so well, you can see why things led to that. And again, you can have empathy for the people who are experiencing this. And I think sometimes it can be easy to kind of fall into this role of a foster caregiver. You know what resources are out there, you know what choices are best. You might have a vastly different life as the primary parents of the kids who are staying with you. But I came across a quote when I was looking at different opinion pieces of this series, and I want to share it with you. You can't weigh options you don't see, much less don't have. So really taking a step back and meeting the person, the primary parent, where they are might be better than just trying to force different resources. I have to admit, I was dealing with a situation where there was a person who was experiencing domestic abuse and they didn't know how to get out. Very similar to Alex, there really weren't many options for them to leave their abuser. And while they're caring for multiple children, while they're working a job, they don't have time to spend hours on the phone trying to make sense of all the different services that could be available. And so I started making those calls, and it was confusing. It's absolutely confusing to figure out, okay, where do you have to sign up to get alternative housing, which right now there is a huge shortage and a long wait list. We're talking like 2 to 5 years. So if you're trying to get out of a situation, you're pretty much stuck where you are because there's nowhere to go. You can opt for a shelter, but again, you're weighing the options of, a warm home with all the necessities that your family needs. But yes, there's the risk of that abuse, or going into a shelter where there's, kids sleeping on the floor and no privacy. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer. I'm just saying these are the tough decisions that people have to deal with. And there was another quote that I found from Little Fires Everywhere, where Kerry Washington is talking to Reese Witherspoon, because Kerry Washington is being accused of being a bad mother. And she said, "You didn't make good choices. You had good choices." And let's be clear, Alex is a white woman in the series, and there are many more women and families of color who are facing poverty at a disproportionate rate. And the way that this series humanizes Alex, this person who is on multiple different government assistance programs, she's not looking for a handout. She's working hard. She's doing everything that she possibly can to break this cycle. And she's just asking for some dignity, for some respect. And what I really want to just share with all of you is that this series does an incredible job of portraying really complex issues of domestic violence, emotional abuse, which I didn't even get to talk about, and what it can be like living and working below the poverty line, which hopefully is something that we won't experience. But as a foster caregiver, we will come into contact and be asked to communicate, to support, to welcome people into our families who are going through this. So needless to say, I strongly recommend all of you to watch this series. If you're looking for a book and you're a fan of memoirs like I am, make sure you pick up Stephanie Land's book. I'm actually doing the Audible version. And like I said, I'm about halfway through, so I'm seeing, some things that are very true to the series and other things that kind of go in a different direction. And if you have watched the series already, be sure to comment below and let me know what your favorite parts were, what really resonated with you, what are the lessons that you took away from it. That's it for this video. Make sure you like and subscribe and make sure your notifications are on, and we'll see you next time.